In this video, we're going to talk about the eye. Remember, the eye was a sense organ. That meant that it allowed us to pick up a certain type of stimuli or stimulus and turn that stimulus into something that we can detect for communication or different purposes. So if the example would be if we see a bear, right, the bear itself, we won't be able to see an image of the bear unless we change light. So this bear will emit light, and we need to change this light energy into electrical energy, right? And once we've changed light energy into electrical energy, we need to send that impulse via neurons to the brain, and then the brain itself gives us the image of the bear. So the first part of all this happens in the eye itself. So this would be the eye, and that's why we call it a sense organ. So I'm going to talk about how we can change light energy into electrical energy, and thereby help us to give an image in our brain. And this is what this dot point is more or less all about, but more specifically, it says describe, which means provide key features, describe the anatomy and function of the human eye, including the conjunctiva, cornea, sclera, choroids, retina, iris, lens, aqueous and vitreous humor, ciliary body, and the optic nerve. So we need to describe, which means provide key features, but we need to talk about the anatomy. Anatomy more or less means structure, so we need to talk about how each of these different parts, how they look like, more or less. And the other part was we need to talk about the function. So describe the anatomy, the structure, and the function. So what does each part actually do? And we'll find out that much of the structure and function are related. So something looks a certain way because it has to perform a certain function. We'll go through those examples. But to make it a bit easier, because there's a couple of different, there's 10 different or 9 different parts you need to know, put the eye into 3 different layers: the outer layer, middle layer, and the inner layer. Right? So we're going to talk about each of these layers in more detail. But the outer layer would be, for example, the cornea and sclera. The inner layer, the black layer here, is the choroids, the lens, the iris, the ciliary body. Then we've got the inner layer, which is the retina. And we have humor, which is the liquid. So aqueous and vitreous humor. So we're going to talk about each of these parts in much more detail. But what we're not going to be talking about is we're not going to be talking about the eyelids. So that would be the thing that closes and opens. We're not going to be talking about the eyebrows, and we're not going to be talking about the eye tear ducts, right? So tear ducts, those 3 parts, even though they're really important, we don't have the time and they're not mentioned in the syllabus dot point, so we're not going to talk about them. But I'll talk about the parts we need to know. So again, the first thing was the conjunctiva. Now this is actually, so if this is the outer layer, this here is the outer layer, the white one. The conjunctiva is actually a thin membrane. I'll write that down. Conjunctiva. That's a thin membrane on top of the outer layer. So it's a thin membrane. So that's the structure, right? Thin membrane is the structure, and its function is it provides moisture, so that's water. It produces mucus, and also helps us protect a bit against pathogens as well, right? So this would be the conjunctiva. That's on top of the outer layer. The outer layer itself, oh now I've made a bit of a mess. There's 2 parts to the outer layer. There is the sclera, which is more or less this part here, all the way around. So the back of the eye and the sides of the eye is the sclera. Remember, these 2 parts I'm mentioning here is the outer layer, so the white layer. And this part here, the front bulge, a little bit of a hill you can see, that's the cornea. Cornea, right? So cornea and sclera, that's the outer layer. The conjunctiva was that membrane that covered the surrounding parts of it. So what does the cornea and the sclera do? The cornea is relatively thick. It's a thick structure. It is transparent, which means it's see-through, so you can see through it. It's a bit like a window, and I'm going to use the window analogy in a second. So that's what it is. It's thick and it's transparent. And what does it do? Well, what it does, it helps us, first of all, to protect the eye. It's kind of like a covering of the eye, and also it allows us to bend light. It's the first part of 4 parts that help us bend light on the back of the eye. That's the cornea. The sclera is not transparent. It's also thick. So it's thick, but it's not transparent, so it's not see-through. And it gives us the shape of the eye. So that's the first 2 were the actual structure. Next to are the function, the shape, right? So we have that nice round shape because of one reason, because of the actual sclera, and also it gives our skin more protection. It's a thick layer. So those two, that would be the sclera and the cornea. And the analogy would be, for example, that the cornea is like the window, and the sclera is like the wall of a house. Right? So if we look into a window, what we see is we see the wall, mostly the wall and the insides of the house, right, the floor and the wall. We don't really see the window itself. Obviously here we see the white parts. I couldn't find a better window, but just imagine this window is transparent. Right? So look for a window and we only see the white wall in the back. Same with the eye. Whilst this whole part, the front part, is actually the cornea, right? The transparent part. We don't see it because it's transparent. So it's like looking through a window. And what we see is we see the white of the eye. And the white of the eye happens to be the sclera, which is the back and the sides. So it's like the wall and the floor. So we don't see the cornea, but it's there. But we see the sclera, which is the white part. But they're both important. They both have important functions. Next is the middle layer. Right? So the middle layer has different parts to it that all come out of it. First of all, there is the choroid. So the choroid is that blue, most of that blue layer is the choroid layer. Alright, so its structure, it is black. It has black pigments. It's black in color. And it also has lots of blood vessels. That's its structure, black, and it's relatively thin. I mean, it's thinner than the outer layer. These are the structures. What's its function? Well, its functions is, first of all, obviously it's got blood vessels in it, which means it supplies blood to parts of the eye. Supplies blood. But because it has these black pigments, what these black pigments do, black absorbs light. So you can imagine there might be light passing through, and it might be bouncing onto random spots that it's not meant to bounce. It's meant to be focused on one part of the eye, just one part, whereas some light rays might bounce on randomly, different parts. So what this black part of the pigment does, the black part absorbs the light. So if this light goes here, and it gets absorbed by the choroid, that means we don't see this random light, which means we don't get a bad image. We don't get a false image. So it will absorb, it's called absorb, stray. Stray means a light that's not gone where it's meant to go. Stray means it's gone astray. Stray light. So these two functions are of the choroid. It supplies blood to all parts, many parts of the actual eye, and it absorbs stray light. Now there's different parts here as well. We've got the ciliary body, which is this part here, right there. That's the ciliary body. I'm going to cover that in a bit more detail in a second. Ciliary body. And its structure, right, first the structure. Structure has these ciliary muscles, which we'll talk about in a second. It has these ciliary muscles. And it also has the suspendary ligaments. And these help it attach to the lens, which we'll talk about in a second, the suspendary ligaments. I'm going to talk about the function in a second. This here is the iris, and we're going to talk about the iris more in a second as well. The iris has, in terms of structure, it's a muscle, more or less, that can open and close. And it has these different types of pigments as well. So the pigments is what gives our color. So if you've got blue pigment, that means you get blue color. Or sorry, if you have very little pigment, that means you have blue eye. If you have lots of pigment, you have darker eye colors. There's no blue or black pigments. Just lots of pigment means darker color. No pigments means lighter color eye-wise. That's the structure of the iris. The structure of the pupil. The pupil is just an opening, and we're going to look at that more in a second. It's just an opening that lets light pass in and out. And sorry, this was actually meant to be the lens. Sorry. The lens. What kind of structure does the lens have? Well, it's a biconvex lens. Convex means it has this kind of shape. It has like a bulge. Biconvex, bi means two, so it's going to have a bulge on either side, on both sides. And we'll have one bulge on this side, and another bulge on this side, which is why it's called biconvex. As you can see the bulge here, one here, and then one there. So it's a biconvex lens, and it's also transparent, so it's see-through as well, which is important, because its function is, it's the main thing that helps us to focus light on the back of the eye. Right? So the cornea was one part. The cornea helped us to focus light on the back of the eye. But we're meant to, light will come in from all different parts, all different areas into the eye, right? So it would and usually go to different places all over the eye. But what the lens allows us to do is, if we say we want to focus it on this spot here, the lens will make sure first the cornea will bend it a bit, then it will be bent even more when it gets to the lens, and it allows us to have this straight, everything being focused on one point, which gives us good vision, right? So if we have good vision, that means we have it all focusing on the same light. Otherwise, it becomes a bit blurry if it's all over the place. Right? So that's the function of the lens, is to focus light on the back of the eye. So focus light on the back of the eye. The one more that I forgot was that pupil, which will be this one here. So what the pupil is just, so the structure, it's just the opening. The black part in the eye that you see in people, the black part is the pupil, and it helps, so that's its structure, it's just black opening, and its function is to control amount of light that passes in. So control amount of light is its function. Structure is just that black opening. Alright, so I'm going to have a bit more detail for all of this. So we just talked about ciliary body. We said that ciliary body consists of the ciliary muscles, which are these parts here. That's the ciliary muscles, right? And then we said the suspender ligaments. These are these ligaments here, and they connect the actual muscles to the lens. So that's the actual structure of the ciliary body. Now, what function does it have? Well, for example, if you are far away, if you have far vision, you need to have this structure. This gives you sort of far-sightedness, which means you get to see things which are from far away quite clearly, and this structure will give you near sight. Will be used when you have things close by, so near vision. Basically, you need to have a different type of shape of the lens if things are far away or if they're close by, right? So basically, in this case, we have, if an object is really close by, you're going to have the ciliary body, so the muscles here, they're going to be relaxed, so the muscles are going to be relaxed, which means that they're going to be pulling this lens into a long, elongated shape. Because you can see relaxed means these muscles are short. If they're shortened, they're going to pull on the actual lens, and they're going to make it into this flat kind of structure. Whereas if you have the ciliary muscles contracting, what that means is this muscle becomes longer and it will squeeze. So you can see now it's squeezed, the lens is squeezed. It's got more of a round shape as opposed to a flat shape. And this happens if the actual object is far away. But the idea is basically it allows us to focus light in a slightly different way, which we need to be able to have to be able to see clearly from both far and close by, right? So the ciliary body just helps us to focus the lens depending if things are far away. So that in this case the ciliary body will relax, or if they're close by, in that case the ciliary body will contract. But this was an oversimplification. There's a bit more to the whole process, but I just wanted to give you a quick kind of idea of what the ciliary body does. So its structure it has ciliary muscles and its suspender ligaments which attach to the lens. Its function was to I've got a brain freeze. Its function was to change the shape of the lens, depending on what the actual, if you're far away or close by. So we have to have two different types of shapes, depending on where we are. All right, so the iris as well, the iris is this part here. And we said that the iris itself, its structure is it has muscles and these pigments, and its function is that it controls the size of the pupil. Controls the size of pupil. So we said that, for example, when it's really dark, what you tend to find is the iris is quite short, right? So the iris might only be up to here, when it's dark. The reason why is that allows us to have a bigger opening, a bigger pupil, which means more light can pass through, right? So when it's dark, we don't have much light, which is bad because we wouldn't be able to have a good vision if there's not much light. We see things when the light passes into our eye. So the iris becomes shorter to make sure we've got more light coming in, so we have a better image at night. Whereas if it's really very sunny, we've got so much light coming in, very much dense light, which means the iris will actually become longer. The pupil, so the opening of the eye, which is the pupil, this part here, will become smaller. The iris will become cover more of the eye to make sure that only a little bit of light passes through, basically to protect our actual eye. So if we have not enough light, our iris will become shorter to allow more light to pass in. If we have too much light, our iris will become cover most of our eye, so the pupil becomes smaller. So this part here, the opening, is called the pupil, right? And this is where light can actually enter into our eye. And all that would be connected to how much light the eye actually wants. So during daytime, the pupil will be quite small, so the iris will cover most of our eye. Whereas during nighttime, to allow more light to pass in, the pupil will be quite large, which means the iris is quite small. So iris and pupil are connected. Right, so that was the middle layer. So these structures, the ones in gray, were all part of the middle layer. And then we have the humor. So there is the vitreous humor and the aqueous humor. Humor just means a cavity, so a space where there's some kind of liquid. So aqueous, I might have spelled aqueous wrong, probably did. Aqueous humor, which is this part here, and then there is the vitreous humor, which is a liquid in here. So what is the structure of the aqueous humor? Well, it's mostly just water, and it has some nutrients as well. Because, for example, the cornea and the lens, right? So cornea is the front window, and the lens here. These things don't actually have any blood supply, so they have no blood, but they still have cells that need to have nutrients, right? So what happens is this aqueous humor, which is actually produced by the ciliary body. So the ciliary body produces aqueous humor. It will have the nutrients for the cornea and for the lens to make sure they can keep going. They can keep living even without any blood supply. That's the aqueous humor. And it also allows the light to bend slightly. So it's also part of the light bending process. And then we've got the vitreous humor, which is more like, it has more of a gel structure. So structure-wise, a bit more like a gel. That's because there's not just water, but also some proteins and other things mixed into this. And what it allows us to do is allows us to bend light as well. So it helps us bend light onto the back of the eye. And in addition, it gives us some shape as well, right? So without the liquid, we would have not a nice round shape. That's the vitreous humor. So vitreous humor is in the back of the eye, and in the front part between the lens and the cornea, we've got the aqueous humor. So those two humors are the ones you need to remember. And then we still have the inner layer, which is this part here, the red part. This is called the retina. And the retina itself has the rods and the cones. And this is, you don't need to remember this for the dot point, but this is the fovea. This is just a spot on the eye that has lots of these rod and cones, right? So the rod and cones are these ones. These are the receptors, the photoreceptors. So these are the photoreceptors. These are the things that will pick up the actual light and change it into an electrical impulse. So these photoreceptors are in our retina, the inner layer, right? And the fovea was just a point in that layer that has lots of these, very many of them, very dense area. So what does the inner layer do? So the retina changes, so the structure is just has lots of these rods plus cones. That's the structure, which are these photoreceptors, and its function is to change the photo energy, so the light, so change light energy, so the sun light coming from different objects into the eye, change light energy into electrical energy. That was the function of the actual retina. And the fovea, again, that's just a point where there's lots of these rods and cones. So the last one was the optic nerve. the optic nerve, once we've created this electrical impulse from the retina, once we've created this electrical impulse, we have to send it from the eye to the brain. So this is the optic nerve, this part here. And what the optic nerve does, it sends, structure first, just lots of neurons. So a bundle of neurons, these are our messengers. And what it does, it sends the electrical impulse to our brain. So electrical impulse to brain, that's its actual function. Right? So I'll go over some of the bits again. First we have to describe the structure and function of the conjunctiva. The conjunctiva was this outer membrane. It was thin and it provided moisture and protects the outer part of the eye. Then we have the outer layer of the eye, which is made up of the cornea and the sclera. So the cornea was that bulge here, which was thick but was transparent, so it was see-through. What it allowed us to do is allow us to protect the outer part of the eye, but also to bend light onto one part of the eye. Whereas the sclera was thick but was non-transparent. Right, so this part here was the sclera, the sort of middle and back sections, side sections of that outer layer. It allows us to keep our shape of the eye and protect our eye. And in terms of the middle layer consisted of different parts. We've got the choroid, which was black in structure and had lots of blood vessels and was thinner than the outer layer. Its function was to supply blood to all different parts of the actual eye and also to absorb these stray lights. So some of these lights might go astray, and the function of the choroid layer is to absorb that light to make sure we don't get false and blurry image. Then we had the ciliary body. That was the suspendary ligaments and the ciliary muscles, these ones here, and they connected to the actual lens, and they made sure that we could change the shape of the lens depending if we have to have far or close vision. When we have the iris, which was the front part here, the iris consisted of muscles which had different types of pigment in it, different levels of pigment, and what it did is allow us to control the size of the pupil, which at the same time would control the amount of light passing into our eye. Too much light would damage our eye, too little light would mean we don't see properly. The pupil was just a black opening. That was the middle part here between the pupil, and that controlled the amount of light that would pass in. Again, too little light we wouldn't see properly, too much light would damage our eye because it has lots of energy in it. We would have our lens. This is a structure, a biconvex lens, which means this is convex and this is biconvex, two of these structures. It was transparent, so it's see-through, and its main role was focus light on the back of the eye. Then we had the aqueous humor. The aqueous humor was this part. It contained nutrients, and it supplied its function. So it was water and contained nutrients. That's the structure, and its function was to supply blood supply nutrients to the lens and the actual cornea. Plus, in addition to that, it also helped bend light onto the back of the eye. Then we have the vitreous humor. That was the liquid in the back of the eye. That was gel-like because it had protein and water in it. That was the structure. Its function was to give us a bit of shapes, the shape of the eye, and also to bend light. And that was to focus it on. So that was also to focus the actual light on the back of the eye. Then we had the last layer, which was the retinal layer. Sorry, the retina, the inner layer, and that allowed us to change light energy into electrical energy, and it consisted of rods and cones. And then we still had the optic nerve, that structure with lots of neurons, and it allowed us to send an electrical impulse to the brain. Right, so the retina changed it from light to electrical energy, and then the optic nerve sent it from eye to brain so we could see the actual image. That's basically what you need to know. You need to know the structure and function of each of the different parts, but split into 3 different layers. Remember which parts belong to that layer. You need to be able to label the eye. You might be asked to label, but you might also be asked to talk about the structure plus function of each of those different parts. But I hope that was useful.